Chapter 9. Kate and Austen. Austen stretched his aching back as he looked along the row of stalls. He had never worked so hard in all his life. He strongly doubted a doctor would approve of him working like this after the beating he had taken. But he found he was more content than he had been in ages, maybe ever. He never would have thought that hard work would lead to such a feeling, but there was the proof right in front of him. He thought with a grin of what his daughter would think if she were to lay eyes on him at this moment. Kate chose that moment to walk up to him. She returned his grin with one of her own, which caused a small flutter in the area of his chest. Austen chose to ignore the sensation. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Appleton," he greeted her. "I think it is safe for you to call me Kate, my lord, since you are a nobleman who happens to be mucking out my stalls." Austen grinned at her again. "You should call me Austen, then. It's what my friends used to call me." "What do they call you now?" she asked, obviously curious. Heat crept into his cheeks as he realized he should have curbed his tongue. He didn't want to admit to her that he no longer had any friends, so he attempted to change the subject. "Your foreman is a slave driver, Kate." She smiled. "You probably should be still in bed after what you have been through." "Oh, please, don't chase me back indoors," he wheedled. "I haven't found anything this diverting in years." "You have led a strange and sad life, my lord, Austen, if you find mucking out the stalls to be a good time." He shrugged. There was no arguing with her logic. It was the satisfaction of accomplishment, not the actual activity, that was leaving him feeling so refreshed. It would be too long of a story to try to explain. "Do you know what my next task is to be?" "I do believe you have earned some nourishment. Come along with me. The cook has sent you a picnic." "Oh, how lovely! Thank you. I surely couldn't come in the house in this state." He made quick work of washing his hands and face in the trough, then followed in her wake as she led him to a bench situated near the house. "Are you quite certain you are not overdoing yourself with all this work?" Kate asked, her tone a little anxious. "I have so much to learn and cannot presume upon your hospitality much longer. I cannot be sitting about when I have this great opportunity presented to me." "You are not burdening us with your presence here. In fact, it is a pleasure to have a new person to talk to." They munched on their lunch for a few minutes in silence as Austen digested her words. He was deeply grateful and had no desire to take advantage. He was long overdue on getting his life on track. He needed to do this for himself and his daughter. "I really ought to send a message to my daughter. She is probably beginning to get a bit worried that she has not heard from me. You may make use of my library whenever you wish." She paused for a moment and thought. "Actually, I think you might need to learn a little bit about record-keeping, so if you would like, I could show you that this afternoon. It will keep you away from my steward for a little while and give you some much-needed instruction." She blushed fiercely at this and began to stammer. "Not to imply that I am a fit instructor, of course, or that you have been mistaken in something because I, of course, know nothing of the state of the books at your estate." Austen laughed and broke into her disjointed speech. "I took no offence, Kate, let me assure you. You are quite right that I know nothing about record-keeping. But how could you have known this?" Her blush remained. "It is the first thing I thought of when you explained how straitened your circumstances have become. It is unlikely that a viscount's estate should get to such a state, unless you are being swindled by someone, and it would show in the books. Do you have a steward that you trust?" "I never thought about it, I am afraid. I have a steward. He has had ready explanations whenever I lamented the state of our coffers. Since I didn't know anything about it, I never thought to question him." "Well, I can give you some ideas about what to look for," she told him. "You know how to do these records?" Austen was even more ashamed of himself. If this lovely young woman was capable of doing it, surely he should have been able as well. Austen thought she was about to say, of course, but then thought better of it. She simply nodded before explaining. Since I was the only child, my father knew this would all be mine one day, so he made sure I knew how to look after it. Even though I married, he never wanted me to feel ignorant. She paused again, obviously uncomfortable with what she was about to ask. Did your father not give you the same instruction? Unfortunately, no. Austen looked out at the heartening view of Kate's thriving farm. My father was even more dissolute than me. He found it in him to laugh. I, at least, recognize that changes need to be made. Then, more self-deprecatingly, he continued. Of course, that could be just because I have hit the bottom, so there is no other choice. She was looking at him with a serious, steady gaze. I think there is always a choice, my lord. As you said, you could just rely on your daughter for an advantageous match. In fact, you aren't even that old. You could probably find an heiress to wed. Austen shuddered at the suggestion. Can you imagine? For any bourgeois father to be willing to give me his daughter and a large sum of money? He would have to be a very loose fish, besides being a vulgar mushroom. And his daughter would have to be bracket-faced and bad-witted. No, thank you. Kate burst into gales of laughter at his words. It took her a few minutes to get her mirth under control, and she had to wipe the tears from her eyes before she could look at him clearly. I do not think it would be as bad as all that, but I can see your point, my lord. Very well. Let us see if we can arrange it so you can get yourself sorted. Then you can carry on however you wish. By the time they had finished discussing the matter, they had also finished their meal, so they went inside to follow through on their plan. First, though, Austen needed to change out of his work clothes. As he slowly climbed his way up to his room, he was glad Kate had thought to acquire a change of clothes for him from one of the stable hands. Otherwise he would no longer be fit company. As quickly as he could, despite his aches and pains, he stripped off the offensive garments, cleaned himself up as best as he could without a valet's assistance, and changed back into his own clothes. Despite his dread for the task ahead, as numbers were never his favourite while he was a boy, Austen was looking forward to the afternoon spent in Kate's company. She was such a kind young woman, he thought as he made his slow descent back down to where she was waiting patiently for him, her pleasant smile brightening up the room. "Ready, my lord?" "As ready as I am likely to ever be," he grumbled good-naturedly, as they made their way slowly to a library. "You seem to have developed some new aches and pains for your efforts this morning," she commented, her mild tone belying the worried look on her face. "Nothing that a good night's sleep shouldn't fix up. Do not trouble yourself, I beg of you." She looked dubious, but refrained from further comment. When they finally arrived, she stepped inside, and Austen was able to see the welcoming room within. It was much like any library in countless country homes throughout the nation, he surmised, even not unlike his own at Rowanwood. But unlike his, this room had a welcoming, well-used air about it, as though you could make yourself at home in that room and be comfortable. If he had to face the task of learning how to read records, he doubted they could have found a more congenial location. "This is a remarkable room, Kate. No wonder you don't mind your labours here. I might even find the task less than horrible in a room such as this." Kate laughed and looked around at what was no doubt a familiar scene to the point of being oblivious to its power. "It took me a while to be comfortable in here, to be honest with you, Austen." She smiled shyly over her use of his name. "Since I associate this room so directly with my father, it took me weeks before I could even come in here without weeping. But now, the room and I have made peace with one another. I am delighted that you like it. I hope it makes our task less onerous for you." Glancing around the room, her gaze settled on the table set in front of the large windows. "Why don't we sit there? It'll be far more comfortable than trying to crane our necks if we're across my desk from one another." She promptly ensured there were 2 chairs comfortably positioned, and she gathered up her records as well as some paper, a pen, and the inkwell from her desk. Austen was once again swept with a sense of shame that this slip of a woman was waiting on him. She was not a servant, and he had no intention of treating her like one. "Please, let me help you with that," he protested. "Never mind, my lord. I can be much faster if I do it myself. Just find a comfortable position for yourself, as we are likely to be here for a while." He ceased his protests and took a seat. The chair she had indicated was remarkably comfortable, despite being made of wood without any cushioning. He hoped he would be able to keep his attention on the matter at hand. He thought a less comfortable chair might be of more assistance in that regard. But, as she said, if they were to be there for any length of time, it would not do to add to his physical ailments. They settled in and got to work. She explained the principles involved with keeping the household accounts, and what sort of things he ought to look for when reviewing for errors. She then set him to the task of reviewing her records for any errors. "But I doubt you would have any mistakes," he protested. "You can never be too careful," she replied coyly at first, before grinning and saying, "If you see what a proper ledger looks like, hopefully you will be in a good position to verify if yours are being kept properly. This is merely an exercise to get you used to the task, my lord. Do try not to overthink the matter." Austen sighed. "It is a difficult task to turn over a new leaf, Kate. Have mercy." She just laughed and tapped the paper. Before long, Austen found that it was not nearly as difficult as he had expected. While he had been a poor student, particularly in the field of mathematics, seeing the practical application of the dreaded subject made it much easier. He was almost enjoying himself. Of course, the company didn't hurt when it came to that. Finally, when he came to the end of the column, he glanced up into a smiling face. "You are a godsend, my dear. It would be such a wondrous thing if I could take you home with me to Rowanwood, and you could help me straighten out my messes there. With your tutelage here, it doesn't look so hard, but I think in the case of a mess like I have, it will be an impossible task for me." He was surprised when she blushed to the roots of her hair and started to stammer out a reply. "Oh, no, my lord. I am certain you shall be quite capable of managing without me. Despite the knock on your head, you are an apt pupil. Surely you shan't need me. Besides, you would soon tire of having a tutor." Austen chuckled and did not pursue the subject at that moment, but the idea began to take root. She would be a perfect companion. Perhaps he could hire her as his steward, he thought, as he reflected on the idea of prolonging their association. Kate turned to the subject. "Did you wish to have a few minutes of privacy to compose your letter to your daughter, my lord, Austen?" "You needn't leave for me to do that. I feel as though I have no secrets from you at this point." He grinned at her, fascinated by her shy smile. "Well, I was planning to leave to get us some tea, but I won't bother prolonging the task if you don't mind my being here," she informed him. "What is the complete opposite of minding?" he asked rhetorically. She departed the room, leaving behind her tinkling laughter and the faintest scent of lemons in her wake. He stared at one of the blank pieces of paper she had left for him, pondering what he could say to his daughter, especially knowing she might not be the only one who read it. He finally pulled the paper a little closer to himself and set to his task. "My dearest Anne, I trust this letter finds you well. Please accept my humblest apologies for leaving without a word. I needed to get away for a space, and then ran into difficulties. I have made some new friends, and am being well cared for at the moment. I hope to return to you in London within a few days. Take care. Father." He reread his words. There was no information contained in the missive, but it would assure his daughter that he was alive and well, which was the only purpose it served. There was no way to explain, even if he wanted to his daughter, the complete change he felt coming over him, especially not in a letter. If he sensed she could handle it when he was with her again, he would make the attempt, but certainly not from this distance. What he had written would have to do. He sanded the letter and waited for Kate's return to request sealing wax. "I hope I'm not interrupting," Kate declared as she entered the room, followed by a servant. Austen found Kate's household to be run in a fascinating manner. It was obviously a thriving estate. She was clearly a woman of some means. But she did not overburden the house or property with servants. She had the housekeeper, who also seemed to serve as her companion and even the cook. There was one maid and a footman/errand boy, who was now currently carrying the heavy tray. Without waiting for Austen's reply, Kate directed the servant to set down the tray. "Thank you, Jeremy. Right here on this side table should do nicely." "Very good, miss." The servant bowed and left the room. "Are you having trouble with your correspondence?" Her tone was kind but curious. "Not at all. I'm finished." "Finished? Already?" A look flit across her face that was a combination of consternation and irritation. "Men are the worst possible correspondents," she declared with a laugh. "No doubt you are right, but it shall serve the purpose of allaying any concerns my daughter might be having for my safety, and telling her that I shall rejoin her soon. I don't really see a need to go into any further detail." All she did was laugh, which Austen couldn't decide if it were highly irritating or amusing, so he chose to ignore it. "Could I trouble you for some sealing wax?" "Of course, no trouble at all," she responded instantly, hurrying over to a desk to get it. Once he had his letter straightened out, he was swept with the uncomfortable feeling that he ought to express his appreciation for all that Kate was doing for him, but he couldn't come up with the right words. How do you thank someone for turning your life around? "Why are you doing this?" he asked, overwhelmed with his feelings all of a sudden. "Doing what?" She seemed genuinely confused by his question. "Being so generous and kind to a stranger," he explained patiently. "You could have left me on the side of the road where you found me, or had a magistrate see to me, or even if you had thought you ought to see to my immediate needs, you could have sent me on my way the first morning. This, helping me learn how to get my life straightened out, is above and beyond the usual efforts of human kindness." Kate blushed rosily at his words, much to Austen's fascination. It was a strange reaction, as though she had something to hide. Curious, he tilted his head, trying to see into her mind, which was impossible with anyone, especially a beautiful woman. He grinned. She busied herself pouring the tea and arranging everything precisely, avoiding eye contact. "Do I make you nervous, Kate?" he asked, incredulous. She nodded. "Why?" He knew his bold question was a trifle rude given her obvious discomfort, but he could not fathom why the girl would be nervous in his presence. Her blush deepened, but she finally looked at him squarely in the eyes. "I haven't been much in a gentleman's company since my husband was killed, and you are a handsome man. It makes me nervous." Austen's grin stretched across his face. "You think I'm handsome?" He found her words hard to believe, but was warmed by the possibilities. He began to worry for her health, as her face grew even darker. The poor girl looked beside herself with discomfort, but she gave him honesty. "Of course, you are handsome, my lord, and seeing you try to better your situation is strangely attractive as well." He felt like he was gaping over her words. "That is a rather cruel thing to jest about, Mrs. Appleton." Now she was gaping at him. "I would not jest about such a thing," she insisted. "And do not use that tone with me. Just because you are an attractive man does not give you leave to speak to me as though I were a simpleton." "Thinking me attractive makes you a simpleton," he muttered as he shuffled his feet. They looked at one another, both highly uncomfortable. Austen finally broke the awkward silence. "Well, I think you're beautiful, so I should be grateful that you think me attractive." Her colour had finally been returning to a more natural hue, but his words brought the blush back to her cheeks. She could not bring her gaze to his face, instead focusing on his shoulder as she backed toward the door. "I think I hear Mrs. Peabody calling for me. I should go." Austen couldn't hear anyone else's voice, but he did not prevent her departure. He had a lot he needed to think about, and some time alone would be most beneficial. He stayed in the library until he was called for supper. Austen made every effort to be personable and non-confrontational during the meal. It was interesting to note that Mrs. Peabody kept shooting quizzical glances between him and Kate throughout the evening. He excused himself early, as it had been a long day.